I'm Alex, and today I'm talking about universal basic income. So, this article that I'm going to be referring to specifically, at least for the moment, is going to be from the conversation, and the title of the article is Could the Idea of a Universal Basic Income Work in Australia? Um, and so, we're just going to dive right into it, and then I'll stop as becomes necessary to comment on it. So, from next year, Finland will become the first country in the world to introduce a universal basic income, a bold policy idea that gives every citizen a basic obligation free living wage to meet their living costs. And this is awesome. So, there's a lot that people don't talk about when they talk about universal basic income because most of the people who throw the idea around in the lay population, meaning people who aren't like economists and study the effects that this could have, um, don't understand the concept, it seems, and don't understand the way that such a uh, such a policy would be implemented. Going back to the article, at first glance, the concept of a universal basic income seems both costly and at odds with our prevailing sense of conditionality. That is, what benefit to individuals or society as a whole can possibly flow from letting the idle live in uninterrupted idleness? And how could any politician conceivably sell such an idea in Australia, where the divisive narrative of lifters and leaners has been a key plank in justifying recent welfare cuts? So, yes, one of the reasons that they did welfare cuts recently is because Australia, while it has had a budgetary surplus for a long time, after the recent party cabinet that was in power, um, that changed and left the newest um, party in power with with a budgetary deficit. And there seems to be this divide, from what I've heard, between um, Q&A panels and polls, that there seems to be a, again, as I said, a divide between lay people in Australia and the social benefits that they desire, and the politician desire. So the people want more social benefits. The politicians say we can't have social benefits. We have to get the budget under control. We can't run a deficit because deficits are bad. You have to have a balanced budget as a country. And first off, that's not true at all. I mean, the United States runs an enormous deficit. Enormous. Now, this isn't necessarily good, but the United States has been able to work with this for a long time and has an exceptionally high credit rating and is known for, being able to pay off its bonds. So, moving back to the article, however, Finland is not alone. Switzerland will shortly vote on whether to introduce a universal basic income, while in the Netherlands, the city of Utrecht is also considering the idea. It may simply be a matter of time before the idea of a universal basic income becomes mainstream in Australia. And honestly, this wouldn't surprise me. While there is a lot of conservatism, which I kind of blame America for, somebody from Australia once said, somebody once said, in whichever direction the United States steps, we shall step also. I believe it was somebody from Australia. And it was basically saying, the United States has got it going on. Whichever way they go, we should also go because they're doing something right. And I blame that ideology for the reason why there seems to be sort of a conservative group in Australia that reflects the conservative groups here in the States. And actually, the while the liberalism of Australia, I would say closer matches the liberalism of Western Europe. There are parallels to be made, though I think that with the way that the population is structured and the desires of the people, that universal basic income will probably come to Australia before it ever gets to the United States. In the United States, universal basic income is a pipe dream right now, though it would have a number of social benefits. Moving back to the article, um, it talks about the idea of universal basic income, um, long history of support from both sides of politics, though it would not. It does in Australia, not in America. One of the reasons for this is that a key objective is to reduce disincentives to work. This sounds counterintuitive. Giving everyone a basic income to live on without working would surely increase disincentives to work, which absolutely not true. Humans love to work. If humans don't have a job, it's like if people don't have a job, then they become depressed and oftentimes drop out of the workforce. You can see in American politics, what they don't often show you is that while there is a decrease in unemployment, yes, there are jobs being created, but a portion of that is people dropping out of the workforce, not just because of age, but because they are discouraged workers. And that's becoming a larger portion of the population here in the United States. Not to a point where it's concerning yet, but it certainly could be in in recent future, short future, in the very near future. There we go. That's the phrase. But we know that welfare tapers, or the loss of welfare income for each dollar earned in the labor market, can often be steep enough to ensure that work does not pay, or pays so little extra for a full week of work that it discourages job seekers. With the universal basic income, those who want to work keep job income on top of their basic income. And so what it's basically saying is it discourages people. It says that if you can find work doing whatever interests you at whatever income level, and not have to be concerned about your family being provided for, because at least a big chunk of, if not all of, your living expenses, depending on what level you live at societally, are covered. So if you work in a gig-based business, for example, where you build websites for restaurants, and optimize them for mobile. That's a job that where you could have some months where business is very good and you get a lot of clients, and you have money left over at the end of the month. But there are probably also months where things are pretty slim. Depends, how intense the market is. With a basic income, though, you wouldn't be concerned about not getting enough clients, and instead be just more focused on taking care of the clients that you do get, since you know that those basic things that you need are covered, or at least mostly covered. So an added advantage is dramatically reducing the costs of administering even ever more complex welfare benefit system. And then it talks about the cost being about $3 billion in administration costs, which is huge. And that is one of the benefits of universal basic income. In a system like that of the United States, where there is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment, the general unemployment fund, disability, there's all these benefits programs, and most of them, if you just entirely cut the programs and set up a new infrastructure for universal basic income, one, you'd have a more efficient setup, because just send like you basically just are sending a check to any person who's either an adult or however you decide to implement it. And it's a great way to basically consistently have census data. You always know, like you pretty much know when people are born, when people die, when people reach certain age thresholds. Very good way of keeping track of at least keeping track of the general population. So now, of course, it says it's not without costs in itself. Approximately 1% of GDP, according to modeling. Now, this is not that bad, honestly. If we spent 1% of GDP in the United States on um on this, we would be able to provide a fair amount of money to everybody. On the other hand, if we were to gut the programs that I said and move to a single payer healthcare system as well as a universal income, you could it's like you could provide $500 to every person in the United States. Every not adults, every couple, every single person, and would have money left over for your administrative costs. Because $500 to each individual in the United States would come out to 300 million times $500 is 1.5 billion. And you're like, oh, that's sorry, 115 billion. Then you multiply 15 to 18 billion, and then you multiply that by 12 for the number of months, and you get something along the order of basically all the costs together come out to like $1.8 trillion, which is all of Social Security and a chunk of a few other things. And I closing tax loops so you get more revenue. But we're gonna go back to the article. So, in a landscape of debt and deficit, policymakers are seeking to cut public funding on welfare, not expand it, even if Australia's economic circumstances are far more favorable than other economies. And that's what I was talking about earlier with now they have a deficit, but they're in a very good spot economically and could definitely afford to have these sort of more socially progressive policies, and would, as it says, it can be a potent vehicle for enhancing consumer spending, raising economic growth, and generating employment. Now, people ask, and when I brought this up with my own family, I was absolutely bombarded with questions about how something like this would perform those things. And what it comes down to is inflation. By giving everybody $500, you don't see $500 in inflation spending. It's like in inflation, like basically the equivalent of $500 in inflation, because of the individual percentages of each person's income that makes up. So, in people who don't make a lot of money, people who live under the poverty line, in particular, as somebody who lived like that for a few years, they're the that group is affected the most. Middle class people get a nice boost in income, and people who are wealthy, think like $100,000 or more per year, is basically unaffected by it. So, but the important thing is see that the percentage of inflation doesn't isn't equal to the percentage, like the isn't equal to the increase. So you've got when you've got somebody who's broke, and now you would end up basically seeing a slight increase in prices, and that would only be here and for many, it's like for goods and services provided domestically, and this applies to Australia as well. So imported goods, such as those imported from China, would still cost right about the same. A lot of these arguments that you can use for universal basic income also apply to minimum wage. The added, the huge percentage in spending power that people who are on the poorer end of the spectrum allows them to go out and purchase more goods and services with their job income. And so while the necessities of the day to day are covered, they are still encouraged to work for the exact reason that you would expect somebody to want to work to make money. Saving up for retirement or buying, luxury goods. These are the kinds of things that really, really stimulate the economy. Plus, with this being the case, you're still gonna. It's like you might have slight increases in inflation, but the real spending power of every family will increase by more than the affected percent. Back to the article. As we saw with the reception of Duncan's store on ABC's Q&A program, politicians ignore the economic contribution of poor households at their peril. Poor households do not simply pay tax when they go to the shops or fill their car with fuel, but as shown by recent NATSEM or NatSem modeling around raising GST, they pay proportionately more of their disposable income under regressive taxes than the wealthy. Now, I am when this the VAT in a way is a regressive tax. I'm sure that that's somewhat what they're a system similar to that. What they're talking about here is that when you purchase consumable goods, sales tax is a regressive tax because whenever because a poor person and a rich person are going to purchase roughly the same amount of goods. Now, people who are poor may purchase inferior goods instead of the normal version of those goods. They may get off-brand things, but that sales tax, even if they manage to survive on like $300 in groceries and general store supplies in a month, um, whereas somebody who's wealthier, middle class, may spend 500 or 600, but that $300 and the tax on that $300 is going to be a larger proportion of their income than somebody who makes $80,000. It even though that person may spend 1.5 to 2 times more on food, that's still proportionally way like that person may be making 5, 6, or 7 times more than the poor person. So you can see that it truly is a regressive tax. Um, and it says the poor households are critically important as economic consumers, and in fact they are because they tend to be a lot. There are a lot of them. There, it's like I don't know off the top of my head, but the last time I checked, something near the vicinity of 20 to 25% of Americans live under the poverty line. It's a ridiculous percentage. Basically, saying that most of the people who are below the median are also below the poverty line, which is an absolutely appalling number in America. And so I can imagine that in Australia, that it's probably a very similar um, numerical correlation. They probably have the same relationship there. Uh, as the Eurozone, the UK, and Australia all face the growing challenge of deflation, which can be a huge problem, especially for countries who are in debt. That would be that would definitely be something to consider. Um, it's like if deflation ever becomes another shows its ugly head in states. We must grapple with how to generate economic growth when traditional monetary policies such as cutting interest rates and even more unorthodox approaches like quantitative easing have ostensibly failed. Giving every citizen a basic income is one possible solution. A historical challenge to the concept of a universal basic income has been the impact on inflation, but with deflationary pressures engulfing global economies in 2016, the challenge is how to generate consumption, which when you have such a much larger portion of somebody who's young or doesn't make a lot of money's income is suddenly now freed up, they're going to have the opportunity to spend more and save more, and they're going to be able to go out and buy better things, and they're going to be able to go out more often and spend, and it's going to be okay because they're going to have because all the necessities are going to be taken care of. Even lower middle class to middle class populations, this is still going to be the case. A family that only goes out once a month may now go out, once a week because now with an extra X number of dollars, they can afford to do so, and so they do. It's something that helps push the economy in the right direction. Um, it's like especially in now when a lot of the big corporations don't want to give people uh, full time hours. For example, when I was working at McDonald's and the once Obamacare was implemented, my particular franchise manager said that we weren't allowed to work more than 28 hours a week because if we worked 28 hours a week or more, they would have to at least offer us a healthcare plan, whether we were managers or not. So we were no longer allowed to work more than 28 hours a week. But when you're broke and you're working at McDonald's to, pay your bills, that can become problematic. So even if you could only get a job at McDonald's for whatever reason, unskilled or perhaps you're a convict or something like that, then you're really going to have a hard time paying your bills. And a universal basic income suddenly frees you up. Suddenly, it doesn't matter that you've got a job at McDonald's, the bills are paid, and, you may only take home $1,200 a month, maybe. But at least the bills are covered and you've got money left over. It's great. So still, intriguing challenges remain. Finland, like many Scandinavian countries, offers comprehensive childcare and other welfare services free at the point of provision. For more privatized welfare states such as Australia, this presents some challenges. Modeling suggests that some groups, such as single parents with childcare costs, for instance, may be worse off without adjustments. And this is quite possible. With universal basic income, there are certain economic policies that it synergizes with, and there are certain economic policies that are not so synergistic, and in fact can be to the detriment of each other. And one of those synergistic policies is a single payer healthcare system. By having a single payer healthcare system, you cut down on so much cost. There is so much cost decrease for people and for government and for healthcare professionals. And it's really important that and so those two things together can one reduce a lot of bureaucracy. It can reduce a ton of bureaucracy just by having for example, a copay, such as in Australia. Australia, I think it's like a $7 copay or something like that for most care. So they have, or maybe $15 or that. But there's like a national copay, which is how a lot of socialist countries do it. Um, the United States would have to move to something closer to that first before something like universal basic income could be implemented, as you would have to gut some of the administrative costs from running the other welfare systems to cover a universal basic income um, welfare system. So, a greater challenge may be the prevailing vilification of welfare claimants, which has been a key narrative in selling welfare cuts in Australia. So, moving on to a scenario where all are offered unconditional money is difficult to see. And there's a very similar atmosphere in America. It's people most times see welfare claimants, especially the conservative right, as not as victims, but as criminals or as inferior people. However they define it, defined a number of ways on shows like O'Reilly or Hannity or something like that. But there's this dehumanization of it and this sort of denigration of anybody who uses such a system. And so the idea of universal basic income you can see the revulsion on a conservative's face when you bring it up. And in fact, when I brought it up with my family, I did see the revulsion uh, as they bombarded me with questions as to how such a program would work. Um, Yet, ironically, we know that Australians broadly support more rather than less public spending. While there appears to have been a recent decline in support for more spending on welfare benefits, 40% would also like to see more spending on Social Security benefits. In the same way that most of us want to see business pay more rather than less tax, it may be that Australian politicians are currently out of step with public attitudes. And I think that in America it's the same way right now. Though though I do have some hope that we will have another Democrat in office for this presidency and a Democratic Congress, wherein there will be some real power to affect change on the current socioeconomic system of the United States. The recurrent coalition mantra that growing the economic pie is key, not how the pie is split up, is a case point. Generating economic growth to raise revenue to pay for public spending is certainly important, but so is sharing the spoils of that economic growth, as we see with the growing focus upon widening inequality in Australia and internationally. And absolutely, see it all over the place. Now, while you see tons of success stories, you can have a huge pile of success stories, people who are living above, the average pay grade, who are being successful and finding success even in their youths. It's not a large enough percentage. It's not a percentage that you should expect to see. The percentage of people who are suffering from either a lack of economic growth or an inability to receive the sort of uh, benefits needed for a person to adequately contribute to society are simply lacking in their social structure. So this is definitely something that we need to talk about in America, hopefully, hopefully soon. And I have hope that when other countries who are implementing it, such as Finland, um, and possibly even Switzerland or Australia, the somewhat distant future, that America will be able to take a look at these countries and hopefully see the success, if properly implemented, that this could bring and may adopt the policy itself. I'd be very excited for that to become a reality. Anyways, I've been running on a long time, so slash rant. If you like the video, like, comment, subscribe. Check out some of my other videos on the side panel, and I'll see you next time when I talk about burkas and burkinis in France.